Listen, the world you inhabit is a stage, and the history you've been taught is a carefully crafted play. But behind the curtain, in the suffocating darkness, where the real levers of power are pulled, the truth is written in blood and buried. In silence. They don't want you to know. They've spent generations ensuring you never would. Tonight, that changes. We are going to a place and time they tried to erase. A humid July morning in 1876 in the rolling green hills of Bourbon County, Kentucky. At the Beaumont Plantation, 41 men, women, and children rose with the sun to harvest tobacco. They were a tapestry of the new America freed slaves, Irish, immigrants, poor white families, all working toward a shared prosperity. By the next sunrise, all 41 of them were gone, vanished, not fled, but surgically removed from existence. The local sheriff's report, a pathetic 3-page document, claims they abandoned their contracts. A lie, a thin, pathetic veil draped over an abyss. What really happened on that scorched patch of Kentucky earth is not a simple mystery. It is a key to understanding the architecture of control that governs your life right now. It is a story about a harvest of souls reaped, not for profit, but for power. This knowledge is a burden. It is dangerous. Once you hear it, the world will never look the same. There is no going back. If you are ready to see, truly see, then follow me into the shadows of Beaumont. The official records are the first layer of the deception, the one designed for public consumption for the passive and the obedient. They want you to believe in simple explanations, in chaos and coincidence. But men who understand power know there is no such thing. There are only agendas and operations. Imagine the air that morning. Thick, wet, and heavy with the smell of rich soil and ripening tobacco. It was the scent of wealth, of a future promised. Jeremiah Beaumont, the plantation's owner, was a man ahead of his time, or so the story goes. He had weathered the Civil War, adapted to the end of slavery, and built a new model of success. He paid daily wages in gold coin. He built a school for the workers' children. He fostered an integrated community where a man's worth was measured by his sweat, not the color of his skin. To the outside world, Beaumont Plantation was a beacon, a symbol of post-war healing and progress. But you must learn to look beneath the surface of things. Progress is an illusion when it threatens an established order. Any structure that offers genuine assent to the common man is a threat to the elite who built their empires on his subjugation. Beaumont's success was not a source of inspiration for his neighbors. It was an act of rebellion. It was a cancer that had to be cut out. The 41 souls working his land were not just laborers. They were living proof that the old hierarchies were obsolete. They were a symbol of a future that the hidden powers of Kentucky could not, and would not, allow to exist. This social experiment, as a local newspaper editor venomously called it, was a direct challenge to the bedrock of their control. And challenges to that kind of power are not met with debate. They are met with overwhelming and silent force. The whispers had already begun, long before that July night. Rumors of hooded riders on the roads, of nighttime meetings in the basements of powerful men. These were not the random acts of disgruntled bigots. This was the system beginning to mobilize its immune response. This was the first tremor before the earthquake. Let's dismantle the lie of the vanishing. People do not vanish. They are taken. On July 23, 1876, every one of those 41 workers was accounted for. Samuel Rutledge, the freed slave who had become a trusted field supervisor. Patrick O'Sullivan, the Irish immigrant sending letters full of hope back to his sister in Boston. Martha Caldwell, a widow who had found a safe harbor for her 3 children. They collected their daily wages from Jeremiah Beaumont at 6:30 p.m. Thomas Vance, A young man who kept meticulous records noted it in his journal. Every soul present. Then darkness fell. What happened between that sunset and the next sunrise was not a crime of passion. It was a logistical operation. Think about the precision required. To enter a community of 41 people, to subdue and remove. Every single man, woman, and child, without a single shot being reported, without a single witness from a neighboring farm raising an alarm. This is not the work of a disorganized mob. This is the work of a disciplined, silent, and methodical force. When Beaumont rang the work bell at 5:30 a.m., the silence that answered him was the sound of absolute control. The cabin stood empty, but not ransacked. Doors were left open. A half-eaten meal sat on a table. A child's doll lay face down in the dirt. These were not signs of a hasty flight. This was a scene staged to create confusion, to muddy the waters. The personal effects left behind were a deliberate psychological tactic. Martha Caldwell's life savings, $40 in gold coins left under her bed. Patrick O'Sullivan's treasured. Letters from his only family, who flees for a new life but leaves behind their money and their heart. No one. This was a message, a statement. We can take everything from you. Your life, your future, even your past. We can erase you so completely that the only thing left is a question mark. Enter the agent of the system, Sheriff William Danvers. A man described as a gruff Civil War veteran. This is the archetype they always use. The weary, overworked official who sees nothing but the simplest explanation. His immediate conclusion? Mass desertion. He dismissed the concerns of Jeremiah. Beaumont, the man who knew his workers, who knew the wages they would be forfeiting, who knew the personal treasures they had left behind. The sheriff's investigation was a performance, a piece of theater designed to legitimize the official narrative. He and a small party spent 3 days combing the area. Understand what they found. Horse tracks from multiple riders, deliberately obscured. Not the frantic tracks of a mob, but the controlled tracks of a coordinated group. And then, the most telling clue of all, a clue that screams of a calculated agenda. In the eastern fields, 3 acres of the finest, most valuable tobacco plants had been systematically destroyed, cut down and burned in small, neat piles. Why? A fleeing workforce doesn't destroy the source of their income. A rival plantation owner might, but not with this surgical precision. This was not vandalism. This was a ritual. This was the symbolic destruction of Beaumont's success. It was the salting of the earth. A message to anyone else who might dare to build a world outside the established order. We will not only take your people, we will burn your dream to the ground. We will poison your land. This act was the signature of the perpetrators. It was a mark of esoteric, symbolic warfare, not common crime. It was a warning that the forces at play were not just of this world, but were fighting for the very soul of it. The charade of an investigation came to its inevitable, orchestrated end on the 3rd day. Just as Sheriff Danvers was considering, or pretending to consider, expanding his search, he received a visit. Not from a witness, not with new evidence, but from his superior, County Magistrate Edmund Hartwell, a wealthy landowner, a man with deep political connections, a pillar of the community. These are always the men who guard the gates. Hartwell didn't come to offer assistance. He came to deliver an order. The investigation was to be closed. Immediately, the official record was to be sealed. The narrative was fixed. The 41 workers had violated their contracts and fled north. When the sheriff, playing his part in the drama, protested, Hartwell produced a stack of sealed legal documents. He spoke of illegal activities among the workers, details sealed by a court order, of course. He assured the sheriff that closing the case was in the best interest of everyone involved. Best interest. It is a phrase you must learn to dissect. It never means your best interest. It means the interest of the system. It means the preservation of the hidden power structure. The threat was veiled but clear. Any further inquiry would bring unwanted attention and damage the county's economic prospects. The machine was protecting itself. A magistrate, using sealed, secret documents from a compliant judge, shut down a murder investigation before it had even begun. This is not justice. This is the immune system of a corrupt body politic purging a threat and then methodically erasing any evidence of the disease. This is how worlds are controlled. Not with armies in the streets, but with quiet men in fine suits, wielding the law as a weapon and secrecy as a shield. Jeremiah Beaumont was a broken man. He had lost his workforce, his dream, and his faith in the world he knew. He refused to accept the official story. He spent his own fortune hiring private investigators from Louisville. He brought in the famed Pinkerton Detective Agency. These were not local sheriffs playing a part. These were the best men in the business, and they found nothing, not a whisper, not a trace. Their final report is one of the most chilling documents from that era. It concluded that 41 people could not simply vanish unless extraordinary measures were taken to ensure their disappearance. Extraordinary measures. That is the language of conspiracy. It is the language of a power so vast, so organized, that it can abduct and dispose of 41 human beings and leave a void so perfect it is like they were never there at all. Think of the resources required. A network of safe houses, transportation, a disposal site that would never be found, a code of silence so absolute that not one person in a network large enough to pull this off ever spoke. This is the kind of power that men dream of and that hidden elites actually wield. The abandoned cabins at Beaumont Plantation began to rot. The fields went fallow. The place became a ghost story, a local legend whispered by families to frighten their children. And that is exactly what the perpetrators wanted, for the truth to curdle into myth, for the hard edges of a massacre to soften into folklore. 4. The names of the 41 victims to be forgotten, replaced by a vague and spooky tale, because legends can be dismissed, but evidence cannot. They believed they had destroyed all of it. They were wrong. For 50 years, the silence held. The ground kept its secret. The conspirators grew old and died in their beds, their wealth and status intact. Their children and grandchildren inherited their power, their land, and their secrets. The system had won. The memory of the 41 souls was fading into the mists of Kentucky folklore. But the universe has a strange way of balancing its books. Truth is an energy. It cannot be destroyed, only suppressed. And eventually, it will find a crack in the foundation of the lie. In 1923, the crack appeared in the form of a woman named Margaret Beaumont, Jeremiah's great-niece, a schoolteacher from Louisville. Not a warrior, not a detective, but a person with a passion for her family's history. She inherited the decaying mansion, a monument to a forgotten dream. She was not content with the ghost stories. She wanted answers. As she began the painstaking work of restoring the old house, pulling away the water-damaged wallpaper in Jeremiah's study, her fingers brushed against something hidden. A loose board, a hollow space, and inside a collection of letters sealed in oilcloth, hidden away by a man who knew he could not trust the world with his truth. These were not just letters. They were a testament, a confession, a map that would lead her, and now you, into the heart of the conspiracy. Jeremiah had hidden them shortly before his death in 1881, a final, desperate act to ensure the story would not die with him. He had known from the very beginning that his workers had not fled. He knew they had been targeted, and he knew who was responsible. The truth was finally beginning to stir from its half-century slumber. The letters were a chilling descent into the reality Jeremiah Beaumont had faced. They were a record of a slow, suffocating siege. The threats had begun months before the disappearance. They came from a group that called itself the Kentucky Brotherhood, a name that sounded noble, patriotic. But you must learn that the most malevolent organizations cloak themselves in the language of virtue. One letter, dated May 15, 1876, laid out their ideology with terrifying clarity. Mr. Beaumont, your social experiment has gone too far. The mixing of races in positions of equality is an abomination that threatens the natural order of our society. You have been warned. The Brotherhood has voted. You will cease these activities immediately or face consequences that will serve as a warning to others. Understand the language, the natural order. This is the eternal justification of the oppressor. They frame their desire for control as a law of nature, a sacred principle. They see any attempt at equality not as progress, but as a blasphemous disruption of a divinely ordained hierarchy. They were not just racists. They were high priests of a dark faith, a faith built on power, subjugation, and the belief that some men are born to rule and others are born to serve. The letters grew more explicit, more demanding. Dissolve your workforce immediately and adopt proper labor practices, or the Brotherhood will take action to protect the interests of this county. This was not a negotiation. It was a death sentence, delivered on fine stationery. Jeremiah was a man trapped. He had tried to build a small island of decency in an ocean of institutionalized hate, and the sharks were circling. He was witnessing the true face of power, the one hidden behind the polite smiles and legal documents of his peers. Jeremiah Beaumont was not a fool. He knew the threats were real. He knew the men behind them were not idle thugs, but the very architects of his society. Margaret found copies of the letters he had written, pleading for help. He wrote to the governor of Kentucky. The letter was either intercepted or ignored. He contacted federal authorities in Louisville. But this was 1876. The political will of Reconstruction was dead. The federal government had lost its appetite for protecting the rights of its most vulnerable citizens. The system was designed to ignore pleas like his. He was alone. The most damning letter was one he wrote to his brother in Virginia, just 2 days before the 41 vanished. It is a message from a man who knows his time is running out. Thomas, I fear I have made a terrible mistake. My attempts to build something good and decent have attracted the attention of men who will stop at nothing to maintain their vision of how things should be. I have tried to protect my workers, but I may have only made them targets. And then, the key, the clue that would unlock the entire conspiracy. If something happens to me or to them, look for answers among the men who meet in the basement of the Hartwell House on the 3rd Thursday of each month. They call themselves patriots, but they are something far darker. Hartwell, county magistrate. Edmund Hartwell, the same man who had arrived with sealed orders to shut down the investigation. The gatekeeper was the high priest. The man charged with upholding the law was the one leading the secret society that operated outside of it. This is the fundamental secret of control. The men who write the laws are so often the first to break them, using the very system they command as their shield. Armed with this name, Margaret Beaumont began her own quiet investigation. She was no longer just a curious historian. She was the inheritor of a sacred duty. She descended into the dusty archives of Bourbon County, a world of ledgers, deeds, and court records. And there, hidden in the mundane bureaucracy, she found the pattern. She discovered that in the years following the Beaumont disappearance, several other integrated or progressive farming operations in central Kentucky had met similar fates. A barn burned here, a workforce intimidated there, contracts mysteriously canceled. In every single case, the official investigation was a sham, quickly and quietly closed by a local magistrate. The pattern was undeniable. This was a coordinated campaign, a silent economic war designed to crush any model of labor that threatened the Brotherhood's dominance. And then she found the financial records. The men she suspected of being Brotherhood members, men like Edmund Hartwell, had not suffered during the economic depressions of the late 1870s. They had thrived. While others struggled, Hartwell had purchased 3 additional plantations, expanding his holdings by thousands of acres. It was blood money. The Brotherhood wasn't just an ideological hate group. It was a criminal enterprise, a cartel. They didn't just eliminate their ideological opponents. They absorbed their assets. They used terror as a tool for market consolidation. They understood the ultimate secret of wealth, that the fastest way to accumulate it is not through creation, but through violent acquisition. They weren't just preserving a natural order. They were rigging the game, ensuring that all the wealth flowed to the top of their pyramid. This was the engine that drove the massacre. Not just hatred, but cold, calculating greed. Margaret's descent into the past led her to another discovery, one even more disturbing than the letters. Hidden beneath the floorboards of Jeremir's bedroom, she found a coded ledger. It was his private record of the Brotherhood's activities, a document so dangerous he could not even risk writing it in plain English. For months, Margaret, the humble schoolteacher, worked to break the code. She recognized patterns, linguistic tricks, the mind of a man trying to leave a message he prayed the right person would one day find. When she finally broke it, the truth she uncovered was staggering. The Kentucky Brotherhood was more than a cartel. It was a shadow government. The ledger contained names, dates of secret meetings, and records of financial transactions that connected the group to politicians in the state capitol, judges on the circuit court, and bankers in Louisville. They had infiltrated every level of the state's power structure. They weren't just influencing the law. They were the law. The ledger detailed their operations. They fixed elections. They blackmailed rivals. They laundered money through legitimate businesses. And they sanctioned acts of terror. The elimination of the Beaumont workforce was referred to by a chillingly banal code name, the harvest. It was listed as a line item, an expense in a broader business plan. This is the ultimate expression of power, to reduce human life to a number in a ledger, to commit mass murder and categorize it as a cost of doing business. This is the mindset of the true elite. They do not see people. They see assets, liabilities, obstacles, and opportunities. The 41 souls at Beaumont were an obstacle, so they were liquidated. This ledger was the smoking gun. It was the blueprint of the machine. And now Margaret held it in her hands. You cannot uncover a secret of this magnitude without the machine turning its eye upon you. Margaret's quiet investigation had not gone unnoticed. In late 1924, the harassment began. Anonymous warnings appeared at her door, telling her to abandon her research. A break-in at her Louisville apartment, where her papers were meticulously searched, but nothing was stolen. A clear message. We know what you are looking for. We are watching you. Her mail was intercepted. Letters from fellow historians and researchers who had offered to help her never arrived. The system was isolating her, cutting her off from support, trying to make her feel alone and paranoid. This is a classic tactic of psychological control. They want you to doubt your own sanity, to believe you are chasing shadows. They use silence and subtle interference to unnerve you, to make you abandon your quest out of fear and exhaustion. But Margaret Beaumont was not her great-uncle. She was not a man trapped and broken by the system. She was a woman with a righteous fire, and the threats only hardened her resolve. She hired a private investigator, a former Louisville police detective named Robert Hayes, a man who still believed in justice. Hayes was good, too good. He began tracing the descendants of the missing workers, looking for any shred of oral history that might have survived. He was making progress. And then he was found dead in his office. The official cause was a heart attack, but his files on the Beaumont case were gone. His secretary reported that two well-dressed men had visited him the day before, warning him to drop the investigation. The message was no longer subtle. The Brotherhood was still active. Its secrets were still protected by violence. And they were ready to kill again to keep the truth buried. The death of her investigator was meant to be the final warning. It was meant to terrorize Margaret into silence. But for a certain type of person, a person who has seen the truth, fear becomes fuel. Margaret knew she was close. She knew the only way to honor the dead, and the only way to protect herself was to expose the entire conspiracy. Her breakthrough came from a place of deep sorrow and long-held memory. She found him in Boston, an elderly man living in quiet obscurity. Ezra O'Sullivan, the nephew of Patrick O'Sullivan, the hopeful Irish immigrant who had vanished in 1876. For 50 years, Ezra had kept his uncle's last letter, a fragile piece of paper that was his only connection to a past stolen from him. The letter was dated July 20th, 1876, 3 days before the disappearance. Patrick wrote to his sister, Ezra's mother, "Dear Mary, something evil is brewing here in Kentucky. Men have been watching the plantation at night, sitting on horses just beyond the tree line. Mr. Beaumont has been nervous and short-tempered. I have a feeling in my bones that something terrible is going to happen. If you do not hear from me soon, tell the authorities that Patrick O'Sullivan did not abandon his job willingly." This was it. The first direct evidence from one of the victims, a voice from the grave testifying that they were not deserters, but captives of a gathering storm. They had sensed the danger. They knew they were being watched. They were not naive lambs led to the slaughter. They were men and women who stood their ground, hoping to reap the harvest they had worked for, even as the shadow of the reaper fell upon them. This letter was a crack of light in a 50-year-old tomb. But what Ezra told Margaret next would blow the doors wide open. In 1891, 15 years after the massacre, Ezra had received a visitor. A stranger, a man haunted by ghosts, who appeared at his door one night and refused to give his name. He was one of them, a member of the team that had carried out the harvest. He told Ezra that he had been bound by an oath of secrecy, an oath punishable by death. But the guilt had become a cancer in his soul. He could not live with the silence any longer. He confirmed what Margaret already suspected. Patrick O'Sullivan and the other 40 workers had been murdered on the night of July 23rd. They had been executed. The stranger confessed that they had fought back. He told Ezra that his uncle Patrick had died bravely, trying to defend the women and children. He was not just a victim. He was a hero, his final moments spent in defiance of an insurmountable evil. The stranger's confession was a torment. He was seeking absolution, but he was still terrified of the Brotherhood. He could not reveal the names of the other killers or the full details of the operation. The organization's power was so absolute that even a man broken by guilt dared not defy it completely. But before he vanished back into the night, he left Ezra with a cryptic clue, a final piece of the puzzle, delivered in a hoarse whisper, a riddle that had haunted Ezra for decades. The stranger said, "If you want to find where they rest, look for the place where the tobacco grows tallest, where the soil is richest, where the limestone runs deepest." He was not just offering a location. He was revealing a final grotesque depravity, a secret so dark it had poisoned the very earth. Margaret understood the riddle instantly. It was a statement of ultimate domination. The killers had not just murdered their victims. They had used their bodies to enrich the land. They had turned their final resting place into a source of profit. It was a final act of desecration, a symbolic gesture that said, "Your lives are worthless, but your deaths will serve our purpose. You will fertilize the crops that will make us rich." She returned to the decaying Beaumont plantation, but this time she brought agricultural experts. They took soil samples from across the 3,000-acre estate. The science confirmed the ghostly clue. In one specific section of the eastern fields, the very same section where the 3 acres of tobacco had been ritually burned after the disappearance, the soil composition was anomalous. The levels of phosphorus and nitrogen were unnaturally high. It was the unmistakable chemical signature of mass decomposition. She had found it. The unmarked grave. The final, hidden truth of the Beaumont 41. She was standing on the very ground where those souls had been interred, their bones feeding the roots of the plants they were supposed to harvest. But just as she was preparing to bring in a team to excavate, to finally bring the bodies to light, the system moved to stop her. An official car rolled up the long driveway. Out stepped Harrison Hartwell, the son of the deceased Edmund Hartwell, now a county magistrate himself. He had inherited his father's power, his position, and his secrets. He was not alone. He was flanked by lawyers, and in his hand he held a court order. The document, signed by a judge in Lexington, prohibited any further excavation on the Beaumont property, citing historical preservation. The system was using its own laws to protect its darkest secret. They were declaring a crime scene a historical site to prevent the discovery of the crime. This is the moment of truth. Not just for Margaret, but for you. You have followed me this far down the path. You have seen the layers of the lie stripped away. The simple ghost story has become a tale of organized terror. The vanished workers have become murdered victims. The local conspiracy has become a shadow government. Do you feel the weight of this knowledge? This is how the world truly operates. It is a pyramid of power, and the foundation is built on secrets kept by violence. The men of the Kentucky Brotherhood were not monsters. That is too simple. They were architects. They were believers in a brutal philosophy of order. They believed that humanity, left to its own devices, trends toward chaos. They believed that for society to function, for wealth to be created, for civilization to be maintained, a strong, ruthless hand must guide it. They believed they were that hand. They saw equality not as a virtue, but as a dangerous fantasy that would weaken the entire structure. They saw Jeremiah Beaumont's integrated workforce not as progress, but as a disease that threatened the health of the body politic. So they acted as surgeons. They cut out the cancer. They believed their actions, however brutal, were necessary. They were sacrificing 41 lives to preserve a system that, in their view, benefited millions. This is the eternal argument of the tyrant. The ends justify the means. The sacrifice of the few for the good of the many, where the many is always defined as themselves and their interests. This is a truth that has been hidden from you, because if you understood it, you would see their hand in everything. The veil is torn. The pattern is revealed. This is not just a story about 1876. This is a lesson about now. The names change, but the structure remains. The Brotherhood is not dead. It has evolved. It wears suits and ties now. It operates in boardrooms and secure data centers. It uses economic policy, media narratives, and technological surveillance as its weapons instead of ropes and torches. But its goal is the same: to maintain the pyramid, to manage the population, to control the narrative, to ensure that true power remains in the hands of a select, unaccountable few. They are the architects of your reality. What Margaret Beaumont stumbled upon was not just a historical crime. It was the operating manual for the invisible prison in which you live. They want you distracted. They want you divided. They want you chasing ghosts and fighting shadows, arguing over trivialities while they rewrite the rules of the game in their favor. They want you to believe you are free because you can choose between two of their approved candidates or buy one of their 50 brands of poison. But freedom is not about choice. It is about power. The power to determine the course of your own life. And that is the one thing they will never willingly give you. They murdered 41 people to stop a small community from achieving it. What do you think they would do to you? Right now, I want you to do something. I want you to declare that you are no longer blind. Go to the comments section and type this exact phrase, "The veil is torn." Do it. Then, after you post it, do it again. The veil is torn. This is not for me. This is for you. It is a declaration, an affirmation that you see the pattern. It is an anchor for this new awareness. It signals to the algorithm, yes, but more importantly, it signals to yourself that you have crossed a threshold. Do it now. By commenting, you have drawn a line in the sand. You have separated yourself from the sleeping masses who accept the official narrative. You have begun the process of reclaiming your own mind. Now, let us descend further. Let us honor your commitment by looking at the final, most terrible truth of the Beaumont affair. Margaret was blocked by the law, by the descendants of the very men who had committed the crime. The system was protecting itself, as it always does. For a moment, it seemed the truth would be buried again, this time under a mountain of legal paperwork. But Margaret had one last card to play. A final witness whose family had carried the secret like a sacred wound for 50 years. She found him in a small house in Paris, Kentucky. An elderly man named Elias Rutledge. He was the grandson of Samuel Rutledge, the Blackfield supervisor who had been Jeremiah Beaumont's right hand, the man who was executed alongside his crew. Elias was in his 70s. He had lived his entire life in the shadow of this event. His hands trembled as he sat across from Margaret, the weight of a multi-generational secret pressing down on him. His grandmother, Samuel's wife Rebecca, had made him swear on her deathbed that he would never speak of what she saw. But some secrets, he told Margaret, are too heavy to carry to the grave. Some promises, when they protect evil, must be broken. He looked Margaret in the eye, and the dam of silence that had stood for half a century finally broke. What he told. Her next was not a theory, or a clue, or a piece of a puzzle. It was the full, unvarnished, eyewitness account of the massacre and its cover-up. Rebecca Rutledge, Samuel's wife, was not on the plantation the night of the massacre. A twist of fate, a divine intervention, had called her to Lexington to care for her dying sister. That absence saved her life. It also made her the sole witness to the aftermath. She returned to the Beaumont plantation on the morning of July 24th. She did not find an abandoned village. She found a crime scene being meticulously sanitized. She was a woman who had survived slavery. She knew the scent of danger. She did not rush in screaming for her husband. She hid. She concealed herself in the dense woods bordering the eastern fields, and she watched. What she saw was not a sheriff's posse. She saw the pillars of her community directing a grim operation. She saw County Magistrate Edmund Hartwell, his fine clothes stained with dirt. She saw Judge Cornelius Vandenberg from the county courthouse. She saw Mayor Samuel Preston. And she saw Dr. Hiram Caldwell, the county's most respected physician. The men who were supposed to be the guardians of the people were the orchestrators of their destruction. She watched as they directed a team of rough-looking men, operators, who drove heavy freight wagons out of the eastern fields. The wagons were heavily loaded, their contents concealed under canvas. Rebecca heard fragments of their conversation. Carried on the humid air, the northern route, arrangements in Louisville, making sure there are no traces left. They were not investigating a disappearance. They were managing the disposal of 41 bodies. They were shipping the evidence of their crime away, treating human remains like any other form of cargo. This was the true face of the Brotherhood, the respectable men giving the orders, and the brutal men carrying them out, a seamless machine of murder and conspiracy. After the wagons departed, the second phase of the operation began, the erasure. Rebecca watched from the woods as the Brotherhood's cleanup crew swarmed the workers' cabins. This was not a panicked cover-up. It was a professional sanitization. They moved with military efficiency. They went through each cabin, gathering personal letters, family Bibles, any document that could identify the victims or tell their story. They burned it all in a large bonfire behind the main house. They loaded clothing, tools, and all personal effects onto smaller wagons and hauled them away. They were not just removing evidence. They were erasing the very existence of their victims. They were wiping them from the historical record. The most horrific part was the chemical crew. Men carrying buckets of lime, a substance used to accelerate decomposition and destroy biological evidence. They spread it everywhere inside the cabins, around the porches, in the soil. They were scientifically destroying the crime scene. Rebecca realized she was witnessing a level of planning and foresight that was beyond comprehension. This was an organization that had a protocol for mass murder. They had a standard operating procedure for making 41 human beings disappear forever. As she watched them, the acrid smoke from the bonfire, carrying the scent of burning fabric and something else, something sickeningly organic, she understood the full, terrible truth. Her husband was not missing. He was dead, and his killers were the most powerful men in the county. They were erasing him, and if they found her, they would erase her too. The final act of the play was the deception of Jeremiah Beaumont. Rebecca watched as her husband's boss rode onto the plantation late that afternoon, his face a mask of genuine confusion and horror. He had been kept in the dark, a pawn in their game. Magistrate Hartwell, the architect of the massacre, approached Beaumont and delivered the prepared lie. He spoke of vigilante threats, of a workforce that had fled in the night for their own safety. He produced forged documents, proof that they had abandoned their contracts. He performed his role with masterful calm, soothing the distraught plantation owner, assuring him that a full investigation would be launched, all while knowing that the investigation was already over, that he himself had just overseen the disposal of the bodies. Rebecca saw the subtle glances between Hartwell and his men. She saw the quiet confidence of men who had accounted for every variable. They had not only planned the massacre and the cleanup, but they had also war-gamed the aftermath, preparing a script to control the narrative from the very first moment. This is the nature of true power. It is not just the ability to commit violence. It is the ability to frame the violence, to tell the story about the violence, to control the perception of events so completely that the victims are blamed, and the perpetrators are seen as the keepers of order. While hidden in the woods, terrified for her life, Rebecca overheard two of the cleanup crew talking. One complained about the hard work. The other replied with words that would be burned into her memory forever. 41 bodies don't bury themselves, but the lime will take care of it. By next spring, this will be the most fertile tobacco ground in Kentucky. Fitting, ain't it? Rebecca Rutledge escaped. She fled to Ohio, her heart shattered, her soul burdened with a truth she dared not speak. The Brotherhood knew she had been absent. They knew she could be a witness. They sent men to find her. They did not threaten her with violence. Their methods were more sophisticated. They offered her money to relocate, framing it as a compassionate gesture to a grieving widow. It was a payout, payment for her silence. She took the money and disappeared, knowing that the organization that had murdered her husband had the power to find her anywhere and silence her permanently. But she was not broken. In her exile, she began to fight back in the only way she could. She wrote everything down. She documented every detail she had witnessed, the names of the men she recognized, the timeline of events, the conversations she overheard. She drew maps from memory, pinpointing the location in the eastern fields where the freight wagons had been loaded. She compiled a dossier on the Kentucky Brotherhood, a testament that was both a memorial to the dead and an indictment of the killers. She kept these documents hidden, passing them down to her son, and he to his son Elias with a solemn oath. Keep this secret until the world is ready to hear it. For 50 years, the Rutledge family protected this explosive truth, waiting for a moment when justice might finally be possible. Rebecca's documents were a time bomb, waiting for someone with the courage to light the fuse. That person was Margaret Beaumont. Elias handing those papers to Margaret was the closing of a circle, a convergence of two legacies, the victims and the owners united in a quest for the same truth. The evidence Rebecca had preserved was more than just an eyewitness account. It was a strategic analysis of the enemy. Her records revealed that the Kentucky Brotherhood was not just a local phenomenon. It was a chapter in a nationwide network of secret societies that had risen from the Fed. Ashes of the Civil War. These were not the disorganized Klansmen of popular imagination. These were the elite, landowners, industrialists, bankers, and politicians. Their goal was to reverse the outcome of the war, not on the battlefield, but in the economic and social structure of the nation. They were fighting a covert war to maintain a system of feudalism, a system where a permanent underclass served the interests of a hereditary aristocracy. The harvest at Beaumont was a strategic strike in that war. The plantation's success with an integrated, well-paid workforce was a direct threat to their economic model, which relied on cheap, exploitable labor. If Beaumont could succeed, others might follow. The idea could spread like a virus, liberating the workforce and destroying the foundation of their wealth. So they made an example of Beaumont. The massacre was a calculated act of economic terrorism, designed to send a message to the entire region. Do not dare to innovate. Do not dare to empower your workers. Stay within the lines we have drawn, or we will erase you. Rebecca's documents listed the attendees of a meeting in Louisville where the decision was made. It read like a who's who of Kentucky's elite. They had debated the Beaumont problem and voted on the solution as if they were deciding on a new business venture. Murder was simply a tool of their trade. Armed with Rebecca's testimony and Jeremir's ledger, Margaret now held the complete story. She had the motive, the means, the perpetrators, and the location of the bodies. But she knew that taking this evidence to the local authorities would be a death sentence. The Brotherhood's influence was too deep. The sons and grandsons of the killers now sat in the same seats of power. The system was designed to protect them. So she devised a new strategy. A woman alone, a schoolteacher, decided to take on a shadow government. She bypassed the compromised state and local officials entirely. She knew the only power capable of challenging the Brotherhood was the federal government. But she had to be smart. She couldn't just walk into an office. She had to find the right person, an outsider who was not part of the corrupt local network. She created multiple copies of all the evidence. She was building an information bomb. She sent packages to trusted contacts journalists in New York, civil rights groups in Philadelphia, historians in Chicago. She was creating a dead man's switch. If anything happened to her, the evidence would be released simultaneously from multiple locations, creating a firestorm that no one could control. It was a brilliant, dangerous move. She was leveraging the power of information against the power of secrecy. She was gambling that the truth, if spread wide enough, could become a weapon that even the Brotherhood could not withstand. This was her declaration of war. She was no longer just investigating a crime. She was orchestrating the downfall of a secret empire. Margaret's network led her to a man in the Justice Department's Louisville office, Special Agent Franklin Morrison. He was a quiet, relentless investigator who had been tracking rumors of organized white supremacist terror groups for years, constantly blocked by local authorities and political pressure. He was a man looking for a case that could finally break through the wall of silence. When Margaret laid Rebecca's documents and Jeremy's ledger on his desk, he knew he had found it. It was the Rosetta Stone for the secret history of the South. For 2 years, Morrison and a small, hand-picked team of federal agents worked in absolute secrecy. They used Margaret's evidence as a roadmap, connecting the dots, corroborating names, and building a case of a massive criminal conspiracy that spanned generations. They discovered the Brotherhood's financial records, their secret codes, their communication networks. They found evidence of dozens of other crimes, assassinations, arsons, acts of intimidation, all orchestrated by the same leadership. The Beaumont massacre was not an anomaly. It was their signature achievement, the most audacious display of their power. The federal investigation became a silent war fought in the shadows. Morrison's agents faced threats, surveillance, and political interference at every turn. But they were protected by the shield of federal authority, operating outside the reach of the corrupted local systems. They were building an ironclad case, brick by brick, preparing to bring a secret society to justice that had believed itself to be above the law for 50 years. The descendants of the Brotherhood, comfortable in their inherited power, had no idea that a storm was about to break over their heads. In 1926, the storm broke. Federal grand juries, meeting in secret, returned indictments against 47 individuals. The list of names sent a shockwave through Kentucky's elite. It included sitting judges, prominent businessmen, county officials, and the heirs to some of the state's most powerful families. The charges were staggering: conspiracy to commit unanswered murder, racketeering, and decades of systematic violations of federal civil rights laws. The trials began in 1927, and they were a national sensation. For the first time, the inner workings of a post-Reconstruction terror organization were laid bare in open court. The carefully constructed facade of Southern gentility was ripped away, revealing the brutal machinery of oppression that lay beneath. The key witness was Harrison Hartwell, the magistrate who had tried to stop Margaret's investigation. Faced with irrefutable evidence of his father's role as a leader of the massacre, and the threat of spending the rest of his life in prison, he confessed. He testified for weeks, providing a detailed insider's account of the Brotherhood's philosophy and operations. He described how the harvest was planned, how the 41 workers were rounded up under the guise of an emergency meeting, executed in the eastern fields, and their bodies disposed of in a deep trench that had been prepared days in advance. He confirmed the motive. It was a demonstration of power, a lesson to anyone who dared to challenge the established racial and economic hierarchy. His confession was the final nail in the coffin of the Kentucky Brotherhood. The secrets kept for 50 years were now public record. As the trials proceeded, the most somber and sacred task began. Guided by Rebecca's maps and Hartwell's confession, a team of archaeologists began the careful excavation of the eastern fields of the old Beaumont Plantation. The world watched as the earth finally gave up its dead. They found them exactly where Rebecca had said they would be. 41 souls laid in a mass grave, their bones intermingled. A lime had done its work, but it had not destroyed them. Forensic science, still in its infancy, was able to piece together a story of their final moments. The evidence showed signs of resistance. Some of the skeletons bore marks of struggle. Patrick O'Sullivan, Samuel Rutledge, and other men had not gone down without a fight. They had died defending their families and their community. Each set of remains was carefully exhumed, treated not as evidence, but as the sacred relics of martyrs. They were moved to a cemetery in Paris, Kentucky. For the first time in 50 years, they were given what their murderers had tried to deny. Them forever. A name. Headstones were carved for each of them. Samuel Rutledge, Patrick O'Sullivan, Martha Caldwell, and her 3 children, Thomas Vance. One by one, the 41 were given back their identities. A monument was erected, a simple stone obelisk, commemorating not just their deaths, but the progressive ideal for which they had been killed. The memorial service was a moment of national reckoning. Descendants of the victims, who had grown up with only whispers and unanswered questions, finally had closure. They wept at the graves of ancestors they had never known, their grief mixed with a profound sense of justice. Long delayed, but not, in the end, denied, the trials ended with the conviction of 31 of the defendants. Their sentences were severe, ranging from a decade in prison to life for the handful of original perpetrators who were still alive. The Kentucky Brotherhood, as an organization, was shattered. Its power, built on secrecy, could not survive the light of public exposure. Its name became a synonym for the darkest chapter in the state's history. But you must understand, this was not a complete victory. It was not a happy ending. Some of the accused died before facing a verdict. Others used their wealth and connections to flee the country. And the network of influence they had built over 50 years did not simply evaporate. The ideology that had spawned the Brotherhood did not die with the convictions. It simply went dormant, retreating into the shadows to regroup, to evolve, to find new forms and new language for its ancient agenda of control. The exposure of the Beaumont massacre became a catalyst. It forced a national conversation about the hidden history of the post-war South. It led to stronger federal civil rights legislation and inspired other investigations that uncovered similar conspiracies in other states. It was a victory, but a costly one, and one that revealed the terrifying depth of the rot in the foundations of the nation. The forces of control were wounded, but not vanquished. They learned a valuable lesson from the Brotherhood's fall. Do not write things down. Do not keep ledgers. Operate through proxies and cutouts. Evolve your methods of control to be less overt, more psychological, more deeply embedded in the systems of finance and information that govern the modern world. Margaret Beaumont dedicated the rest of her life to standing guard over the memory of the memory. 41. She knew that memory is the enemy of tyranny. She established the Beaumont Memorial Foundation, an institution dedicated not just to honoring the dead, but to studying the methods of their killers. She wanted future generations to understand how systems of oppression are built and maintained. The old plantation was transformed. The rotting cabins were restored, not as a tourist attraction, but as a classroom. Each cabin tells the story of the family who lived and died there. The main house became a research center, housing the vast archive of documents from the investigation and the trials. The eastern fields, the site of the mass grave, were consecrated ground. They were turned into a memorial garden, a place of quiet contemplation. It is a place where you can stand and feel the weight of what happened there. It is a place designed to make you think, to make you ask the hard questions. Margaret's work ensured that the story of the Beaumont 41 would not be a footnote in a history book. It would be a living lesson, a warning, a reminder that the price of freedom is eternal vigilance, and that the fight against the forces of control is never truly over. She understood that exposing one conspiracy is not enough. You must inoculate society against the mindset that creates conspiracies in the first place. You must teach people to recognize the patterns, to question the official narratives, and to value the difficult, often painful, truth over the comfortable lie. The legacy of Beaumont is a double-edged sword. It is, on one hand, a story of profound hope. It proves that even the most powerful, most secret, and most ruthless conspiracy can be brought down. It shows that the courage of a few dedicated individuals, a grieving widow writing in secret, a determined woman searching for her family's past, an honest federal agent, can change the course of history. It proves that truth, no matter how deep it is buried, can and will eventually come to light. It is a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit to resist oppression and to demand justice. But there is a darker lesson here. The story of Beaumont also reveals the true nature of the world we live in. It shows us that beneath the placid surface of our civil society, there are powerful, hidden forces that see humanity as a resource to be managed and a problem to be controlled. It shows us that these forces are patient, they are ruthless, and they are embedded in the very institutions we are taught to trust. The Kentucky Brotherhood was exposed and destroyed, but the philosophical blueprint that created it remains. That blueprint is timeless. It is the belief that power is a zero-sum game, that for some to rise, others must be kept down. It is the belief that order is more important than freedom, that security is more important than justice. That ideology is all around you today. It is in the news you watch, the policies you are told to accept, the fears you are encouraged to. Feel so. What is the final lesson of the 41 souls? It is not about them. It is about you. Their story has been a key, designed to unlock a door in your mind. What you do after you walk through that door is up to you. You can choose to be overwhelmed by the darkness of it all, to retreat into cynicism and despair. That is what they want. Apathy is the ally of the tyrant. A hopeless population is an obedient population. Or you can choose to accept the burden of this knowledge. You can choose to see the world with new eyes. You can learn to recognize the patterns of control, the language of deception, the subtle machinations of the modern brotherhoods that operate in your time. The story of Beaumont teaches us that the greatest weapon against these forces is awareness. You cannot fight an enemy you cannot see. Now you see the playbook. You understand the strategy. You know that behind every major event, behind every crisis, behind every political movement, there is an agenda, there is a script. Your first act of power is to refuse to play your assigned part, to question the script, to look for the men behind the curtain. This is the beginning of true self-mastery. It is not about building wealth or status within their system. It is about achieving a level of perception that allows you to operate outside of it, to see the prison bars so clearly that you are no longer a prisoner. The 41 workers at Beaumont were trying to build a new world, a world based on merit, dignity, and shared prosperity. They were murdered for it. Their dream was extinguished because it was too bright. It exposed the darkness of the old world. You now are the inheritor of that dream. Not just their dream, but the dream of every group, in every era, that has tried to build something better and been crushed by the forces of control. To honor them is not to mourn them. It is to continue their work. And that work does not begin with protests in the streets. It begins in the silence of your own mind. It begins by cultivating an unshakable inner sovereignty, by refusing to allow their narratives to become your reality, by building your own framework for understanding the world based not on what you are told, but on the patterns you can now see for yourself. This is the path of the awakened man. It is a lonely path. It will separate you from the masses. It will force you to see the comforting illusions that your friends and family still cling to. But it is the only path that leads to genuine freedom. The men of the Brotherhood believed they were the architects of reality. But the ultimate power to shape reality lies with consciousness. By changing your perception, you begin to change the world. You become a dissident of the mind, and that is the one thing they cannot control. Your mind is the last sovereign territory. Defend it. The story of Beaumont does not end in a cemetery in Kentucky. It ends here, now, with you. You have been given a dangerous gift, the gift of sight. You can no longer pretend you do not know. You cannot go back to sleep. The question is, what will you do with what you see? Will you use this knowledge to build, to create, to strive for your own sovereignty, and to help awaken those around you who are ready? Or will you let the weight of it crush you? The choice is yours alone. The 41 souls are not a tragedy to be pitied. They are a challenge to be met. They represent a future that was stolen. Your task is to reclaim it. Look around you, at the world they have built, at the systems they have put in place. See it for what it is, a farm, and you are the crop. But you are a crop that has become self-aware, and that changes the entire game. The harvest is coming. It is always coming. But this time, you will be ready. This time, you will know the signs. This time, you will not be caught unaware. The veil has been torn. The pattern is revealed. From this day forward, you walk in the light of a terrible, liberating truth. You are no longer one of the sleepers. You are one of the few who know. Welcome to the real world.